Jen also has a couple of announcements she'd like to make in about some of the activities of the club.
Okay. Hi, I'm from the Sonoma State University Human Rights Club, and we're doing a fundraiser through Baja Fresh. And we have flyers that you can bring in there. If you ever eat there, 15% of whatever you spend goes towards our organization. And once we get the money from them, it's a month long. It started on Saturday and it goes till May 23rd. So if you guys go in there and you want to eat, just tell them that you're here eating to support the Human Rights Club. That's one thing. The other thing is we also ordered shirts that say Stop Genocide in Sudan, and we're going to be selling those for about $12. If you're interested in that, come see me outside after class. And I believe that's it, and we're just going to be meeting after class. So
thanks.
Hope you can help.
Thank you.
One last one.
We have too many announcements today. But just a reminder for my talk next week on post-Holocaust literature, there are 2 short pieces to read. They're on e-reserve, and we'll be also sending you that information. One is a short story called The Shawl, and the other is a short story called How You Disengagement Party. It will really help if you read them in advance of my talk next Tuesday.
Now we can get to the business of the day. Barbara and I attended a seminar last spring about educating students to the Holocaust, and one of the presenters took our fancy because of both who he was, but also because of the subject which he was studying. Your speaker today is Mitch Braff. He is the founder and major inspiration for the Jewish Partisans. Well, it's exactly the Jewish Partisans Education Foundation. And this is a work of passion for Mitch. When he was a younger man, he discovered that there was a childhood friend who had been a partisan. And he said that he had never heard about Jewish partisans. A lot of people just talked about Jewish victimization. And he became interested in it and has founded the Jewish Partisan Education Foundation and has lots of information for us. And I'll let him do the speaking on this because he's the expert here. So won't you welcome Mitch Braff?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. It's a gorgeous day and it's really hard to be inside. So thank you for sharing this time with us today, especially under really beautiful conditions. As she was saying, when I was, well, let me ask you first, who before this class, I'm just curious, no one's going to be tested or graded on this. The teachers are not looking. They're in the front row. They can't see your response. How many people heard of the Jewish Partisans before this class? A show of hands? All right. So that was about 0 people. So that's good because that means that you have really a wonderful opportunity to learn and learn a little bit about what we're doing. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. My background is originally in film, and because of that, people are always coming up to me with ideas for films. Most of them are terrible ideas. If anybody in a film or video production in here, you'll have friends who come up to you and they think they have a great idea, and they really don't, but you have to be polite and you have to listen to them. Someone said, you have to make a film on this guy who was a Jewish partisan. And I said, what's a Jewish partisan? So, well, you got to meet this guy. So when he was 15, 16 years old, he was living in a ghetto in Kovno, Lithuania. And he heard that there were some people fighting against the Nazis called partisans. We'll get that in a little minute. And he wanted to join them. So what did he do? He walked 100 kilometers through the forest, basically with nothing. And he found these people, and he said, hey, I'd like to join. They said, do you have a weapon? He said, no, I want to fight the Nazis. They said, do you have any money to buy a weapon? And again, he had nothing. They said, all right, if you can get a weapon, you can come back, maybe you can join our group. Now imagine being 15, 16 years old, 100 kilometers from home, in the winter, in a forest. It's freezing out, and you have to get a gun. And you have no way to get it. He ended up stealing a gun from a Polish police officer, and he was ultimately allowed to join this group. Now, a year later, he's 16, 17, so significantly younger than everybody here. He was with other teenagers blowing up Nazi trains on the way to the Russian front. Wow, when I heard the story. This would be a great movie, right? When I thought of myself at 16, 17. When I went to Redwood High School in Marin. And so please don't hold it against me if anybody goes from our Bible school. And some people, and at that time, 16, 17, I was hoping that Jeannie Becker would say yes if I invited her to the prom. I was hoping that I could get a driver's permit at 16 and drive my parents' old Volkswagen. And here was this Jewish kid living in the forest with these other teens fighting against the Nazis, blowing up trains, and I thought that was the coolest thing I've ever heard. And talking to a lot of my friends, were people just like you. No one heard of the Partisans. And to make a long story short, I decided to change that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Partisans now. So what we're going to do is we are going to talk a little bit about the Partisans. I'm going to show a video clip. We're going to show a website where we just launched yesterday, a new site that has some very cool information on it. And then we're going to have some time for question and answer. And I promise you'll still get out a reasonable time to enjoy this wonderful day. There's a question that many people ask about the Jews during the Holocaust. Can anybody guess what kids ask about the Jews? The number one question. Does anybody have thoughts? What it is? No extra credit. That kids ask, why didn't the Jews fight back? Doesn't that make sense? You hear about all this devastation, these people who were killed. But why didn't they fight back? As you probably know from your class, that this is a very, very, very complicated question. And it's very misunderstood. There was incredible psychological abuse put on the Jewish populations in Eastern Europe that demoralized them. Most people were starved and did not have the strength to fight back. And they would have to fight against the Nazi army. At the time, the most feared and the strongest army in the world. Not an easy task at all. But most importantly, the Jews had no idea what fate was to befall them. It made no sense. Why would they be murdered? They thought that they would be put to work camps. Does anybody know when people went into Auschwitz, what it said when the people walked through at the gate? Work will set you free. It was almost like a movie set, right? People walked in and they were under the impression that they were going just to be put to work. So why would people resist and fight back if the very worst thing people had to do was work? It's not that bad. Why take those risks? Even despite this climate, resistance still existed. And it took many, many forms. In some areas, it took the form of people in work camps or concentration camps and ghettos refusing to work. It took the part of some as art, as music, creative defiance. And then there's also spiritual resistance, people practicing their faith. That was another form of resistance. There was a movie, if anybody saw Uprising a few years ago, about the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising with David Schwimmer. And that was what I think most people know. People have heard of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising before this class? Show of hands. There's more. That's great. And the amount of people how many people were in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising? Dr. Goodman, how many people approximately? Maybe 600? Maybe 1,000. There were approximately 30,000 Jews who took place in partisan units all over Eastern and Western Europe. According to the dictionary, and you'll see this in a sec, A partisan has two definitions. The one we're mostly used to is related to partisan politics, right? So it's a fervent, sometimes militant supporter or proponent of a party, cause, faction, person, or idea. But what we're going to talk about today is a partisan, is a member of an organized body of fighters who attack or harass an enemy, especially behind occupied territory, a guerrilla. I'm going to show a short clip, around 7 minutes, and this will tell you a little bit about the partisans, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about this. So, if we could play this clip from the beginning, please. Chapter 1 from the beginning. We'll be set.
That's why.
These are the images that come to mind when people think about the Jewish experience during the Holocaust. But these are not the only images. There were 20 to 30,000 Jews who formed organized armed resistance groups all throughout Europe. These little-known freedom fighters conducted thousands of acts of sabotage against their Nazi oppressors. They were known as Jewish partisans.
People did not go only like sheep to their death. People were fighting every which way they can.
I did my job the best I could. I was in many battles with the Germans face to face. Sometimes maybe 100 feet away. And bullets were flying all the sides. And luckily, I survived.
Let's say a German column was marching to us. He ambushed them.
The partisans, they fought for freedom, for a better tomorrow, for a better future. And they fought in order not to be eliminated by the Germans, against the Germans.
Jewish partisans were responsible for the liberation of thousands of Jews trapped in ghettos, saving them from annihilation.
I started to organize an escape. I had 55 people, so they were willing to escape. From the 55, 30 were killed. 25 made it to the woods. Without the forest, we couldn't survive.
The trees, the sky, the pine needle ground were our summer home. The underground hut was our winter home. We're dealing with friendly and unfriendly peasants. The friendly peasant supported us with food and with ammunition. The unfriendly peasant had no choice. We would get in at night, pick up the prepared food orders that were prepared for the Germans and leave receipts. The partisans were here.
The moon was our biggest enemy, because if there was a moonlight, because in day we couldn't go, in night. If there was a moonlight night, we couldn't move. So the night, blizzard, heavy snow, heavy rain, this was our friends.
Jewish partisans committed thousands of acts of sabotage, significantly impeding the Nazi war effort.
We were interested in getting involved in sabotage acts to interrupt and disrupt the communication and transportation to the front.
We attacked the depot. We hit the guards and got ammunition, and we blew up the train depot.
We could see the Germans there, and I could recognize the Germans that I wanted to kill, who killed my friend. And they started to shoot towards us, but when they shot all only from revolvers. They were not prepared, they didn't have rifles, they didn't have machine guns. We overpowered them, so little by little their shooting stopped.
We had to blow up a train, and it was sitting in the background and waiting till the train approached, and some of the Germans got killed.
It's the same to Jews as it is to Americans to study the Revolutionary War
his heroes, right? People put their chest in front of English muskets to build a country. We put our chests in front of German muskets to defend ourselves from annihilation and maybe prevent the death of other Jews.
If I was going to get killed, I was going to get killed as a fighter. Not because I'm a Jew.
I survived for two legacies. For revenge in telling the story. Revenge from my father in telling the story from my mother. So if I had a chance, and if I looked for resistance, this was the most important thing for me. And I didn't care if I would be killed, if I wouldn't be killed. I had to do it.
There's such a thing as fighting back. This is the way I think. That's why I'm sitting here to give you the interview. Why else would I do it? I want the people to know that we were fighting.
This is the hymn of Jewish partisans.
So nicht einmal vergeht dem letzten Weg, wenn eine Verstellung bleibt. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show, set up Pointen, das hat mir einen da.
Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show, sveta Poitun, ze trot mir seinen do.
The Jewish Partisan Educational Foundation is bringing this empowering story about these unknown heroes to classrooms all over the country. The foundation is developing innovative educational materials available on the internet from a series of original interviews gathered from all over the world. The Jewish Partisan Educational Foundation, celebrating the unsung heroes of the Holocaust. For more information, go to www.jewishpartisans.org.
Du satt davor zwischen Fahren und Gewinn, das Rieke singen mit Naganes in die Hände. Du sucht nicht gehen, nur lass du gehst dem letzten Weg, hat Stimmen Bleien auf verstehen Bläute.
Okay. Lauren? Light, please. Let me just mute that. You can turn off the image for now until we go to the next part of the program. You got it distracted. Start looking at it. If I'm distracted, then you guys are probably coached. So let me ask, what did anybody learn from this video that you did not know 7 minutes before when it started? Anything? Yes?
That there were thousands of uprisings against the oppressors.
Exactly. There were literally thousands of different kinds of uprisings. And it wasn't as much as clear in this video, but this happened not just in Eastern Europe, places like Poland and Lithuania, but there were Jewish partisans in France and in Greece and in Italy, really all over Europe, Belgium. Anything else? 7 minutes, 100 people here. Someone else had to learn something. Yes?
That the partisans help people escape from the ghetto.
Yes, exactly. The partisans help people escape from the ghetto. And that's important because now most partisans, the story that I explained, the guy's name was Murray. And when Murray had this experience happen to him, he went in as a young, basically teenager, with a gun and said, hey, I want to join, I want to fight you guys. And they let him in after he got the gun. Many groups, if Murray was in his 50s and came in, or may have been a woman and came in and did not have the weapons and the strength, they may have said, take off. We don't have anything to do with you. There's some people, they're living in the forest, maybe you can live with them. They don't have any weapons, they're not protected, they're basically sitting ducks. And you can actually stay with them. There's a famous group of partisans called the Belskis. That's B-I-E-L-S-K-I. Oh, I spell something, everybody writes it down. I've never had this experience before. It was 3 Belsky brothers, and the oldest brother was Tuvia, T-U-V-I-A. And what was interesting about their group, and unlike most of the partisan groups that were focusing on destroying Nazi infrastructure, blowing up trains and bridges, what they were doing are trying to free as many Jews as possible. And they weren't just focused on having young men like Murray with guns They had old and young people, men and women, and they were going into ghettos and breaking out Jews from ghettos. There's a woman who actually lives in Marin who has a story. The Belskis dug a tunnel into her ghetto, and 250 people ran out from this tunnel. Unfortunately, the Nazis knew about it, and only 60 people survived, including this woman. When they ran out of the tunnel, there were people waiting there with guns for them, and she got very lucky to survive. So that was very interesting. That yes, so that it was more than just fighting. That there were people who were also saving Jews. In fact, many partisan groups were doing that. Any other questions? Any thoughts about the video before we go on? Yes.
Were all the groups connected, or were they separate?
That's a great question. Were all the groups connected or separate? I'm going to answer that in a long way, just because I want to talk a little bit about the history. But hopefully, in the next few minutes, you'll have an answer. And if not, let me know. In 1939, there was a pact between two countries. Make your teachers proud. What two countries were in this? It was a non-aggression pact. Russia and what? And Germany. Russia and Germany. Outstanding. Someone in the back there got some brownie points. And they basically divided what country in half, approximately? Poland, right. And they said, look, you take half of Poland, I'll take half of Poland, and we're not going to touch each other. But what event happened in the spring of 1941? Going once? What? Yeah, they invaded. So the Nazis said, forget our pact. We're tearing it up. Doesn't matter. We're going to go, and we're then going to attack. And they started moving east. So the Germans were moving east, and they eventually got as far as Stalingrad. Well, what happened is that when they attacked, you had literally hundreds of thousands of Russian troops who had no idea what was going to happen. And many of them were captured and put in concentration camps and basically starved to death. And many of them went into what happened to be, luckily for them, forest in Eastern Europe and swamps in Eastern Europe. And they hid there. And this has really happened in the spring of 1941 through the end of 1941. It becomes around 1942, 1943, around 1942, and the Nazis now are starting to, all the part of Poland that used to be Russia, they're now putting all the people in ghettos, the Jews in ghettos, and they are liquidating, which is just a terrible word, it really just means murdering, all of the populations there. And what happened is that at that time, because of the misinformation and the Jews felt that they were just going to a work camps, there's actually a story that I find unbelievable. The Nazis, I think, have the nerve to have people who are going to be sent to a work camp, which really means they're going to be killed the next day. And they gave them pieces of paper and stamps for postcards. And they said, why don't you write letters to your friends and family and just, here, it's a freebie. We'll even pay for the postage. Wow, that's great. So people wrote, dear Aunt so-and-so, this isn't bad, we're going to a work camp, we're going to make uniforms for the Nazis. And they signed it. Well, the time Aunt so-and-so got it, this person was dead. And so people would get these postcards and they say, what do you mean Jews are being murdered? I got a postcard. She says she's working. I don't believe what you're saying. This is in her handwriting. So many times, not until the ghetto was being liquidated, till the gates were really closing, did many people escape, and they also went into this incredible forest and swamps where they could hide. And it really was at the very end, because people had no reason to really believe the end was going to happen. No one felt they were going to be murdered. Why would they murder 6 million people? In fact, no one knew everybody was going to be killed. So you had these Jews running into the forest where there happened to be many, many, many Russian soldiers, officers, men and women. And they went there, and for the most part, the Russian groups, what kind of government was Russia at this time? Communist, right. And communism, for the most part, it was okay to have Jews and even women in command. So the Jews would get there, and they weren't as anti-Semitic to them. They said, Jews are coming in, this guy has a gun, this guy can fight, we'll let him join our group. And so the first partisans, and it's very important, all the partisans weren't Jews, because partisan just means an underground resistance fighter. a lot of the partisans were Russians, and a minority, about 10% approximately in Eastern Europe, were Jews. So the Jews would escape from the ghetto, and they would run in and they'd find these Russian groups. Many times they were allowed to join these groups, like I said, the story of Murray. In other times, there was so much anti-Semitism going on there. We have a biography on our website, which I don't expect anyone to download, but that's okay anyway, a man named Frank Leichman. And Frank was a platoon commander of over 400 Jews. And they decided, instead of joining a Russian group, they'd have 400 Jews together, and they were really powerful. Because at the same time, there were people fighting against the Nazis in these groups. There was also a lot of anti-Semitism. And if you can believe it, there were non-Jewish partisans hunting and trying to find the Jewish partisans, and they would kill them. Many partisans. There's an image, I think, in the video of a man on the horse at the very end. That's Abe Asner. Just as a side, Ed Asner, the actor who actually narrated this, it's his first cousin. And Abe, there were 4 Asner brothers. And 2 of his brothers were murdered, not by the Nazis, but by other partisans who hated Jews, because they were so anti-Semitic. So the Jews not only had to fight the Nazis, they had to fight the local population who wanted them dead. And so, getting back to your question, I know this is in a very roundabout way, but what happened is that as the wars progressed, 1942, 1943, the partisans are really doing well. They're blowing up the infrastructure. So if you can imagine, on a map, you have Russia over here on the east and Stalingrad, and you had Germany. And Germany had to bring supplies all the way over to the front. And so as the partisans could blow up trains and infrastructure and bridges, it slowed down the war effort. And around 1943, the Russians are saying, wait a second, we have all these people here and they're on our side, so we can help them. So they started to give them airdrop information. So they would give them radios, they would give them ammunition, they would give them vodka, they would give them money, chocolate. And in fact, there's a wonderful story. There's a man named Leon Senders, and Leon lived in Vilna. And Leon, as a kid, he loved radio. He loved music. And when he eventually joined a group, they asked him, well, what do you do? He said, well, I know a little about radios. And they said, that's great. We're sending you to Moscow. Wow. They trained him how to be a radio operator. So by 1943, he's 16, 17 years old. He knows how to do Morse code. And what they did to make sure that the code wasn't broken, they would have two people. So let's say the both of us trained, we would have our own alphabet, so no one would know what it was in case someone was captured. They put him in an airplane. This guy's never been in an airplane in his life. Flying back over the front, he thinks he's safe. He goes back into Lithuania, thrown out in a parachute with about 100 pounds of radio equipment and batteries strapped to him. He lands, gets stuck in a tree. Someone fishes him out. And what he does is he radios in intelligence information to Moscow, and then they would send him planes. So he would spy on a railroad track, let them know when they're transferring over spare parts or troops, and then they would bomb those. Excuse me. What was interesting about that story is that was as the war was progressing. So 1943, 1944, the Russians got really, really involved in this, and they supplied the infrastructure. This is very similar to the Jewish partisans in France or in Italy or in Greece. The Allies, the British, were helping them tremendously. And so these people were supported by it. They weren't acting alone. And you're talking hundreds of thousands of partisans all over Eastern and Western Europe, and about 10% of these are Jews. I met this guy at a party a few years ago who was Russian, and he was in his 30s. I was talking about this, and he said, of course, because in our country, why was World War II won? It was won because of Hiroshima. It was won because of, I'm totally blanking, the war in France. The Allies came into D-Day. Normandy, thank you. They came into Normandy, and that's why we won the war, right? In Russia, it was the partisans, because that's what their history writes. It's all about the partisans and what they did, and that's very, very important. Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay, so let me go on. So it's important to realize that the Jews made up only a small population of the. It made up a small part of the population of the partisans, but they did a lot. According to Lithuanian figures, Jews made up about 10% of the entire partisan population in Lithuania, and they were responsible. Depending on who you talk to, but some figures say of up to 79% of the damage to trains. Why do you think that the Jews would basically so disproportionately fight so hard? Does anybody have any idea? And this isn't to say everybody fought hard, right? But in general cases, why do you think these people would take these risky missions? Any thoughts? Yes?
Like that one guy said he could pick out the Germans that like killed his family. So it didn't seem really invested.
Exactly. Yeah, I think Norman talks about two things. He talks about revenge, right? I mean, that's true. These are people whose families were murdered by this, and it's totally different. And also, I think it's important to talk about that these people, and it's hard to ever imagine this, but many of these people, in the days of 1930s, 1940s Europe, families would not live very, very spread out. I mean, I live here in San Francisco with my wife. My wife's family is in New York. That's pretty common for a lot of people. And her brothers live all over the place. Everybody would live in the same village. So people had so many brothers and sisters and cousins and nieces and nephews. I mean, families of 60 people within maybe 10 miles from each other. And that was very normal. Many people have that kind of big family here too, but it is not as common. Many, many cases, these people are the only survivors left in the entire family. All their cousins, brothers, mothers, fathers, uncles, aunts were killed. And so what they really, and as Sonia talked, she said, if I was going to be killed, I want to be killed as a fighter, right? Not as a Jew. You're not going to kill me because I'm Jewish. You're going to kill me because I'm fighting back. And this made a really, really big difference. Let me talk about some of the missions. So the Partisans' ultimate goal was to sabotage the Nazi efforts as they fought against Russia. The Nazis needed, what kind of supplies did the Nazis need if they're fighting a war? I mentioned some earlier. What do you need if you're fighting a war? Guns, food, clothing, pardon? Gas, spare parts. All of that was being brought over this incredibly infrastructure with trains. And they've devised many different ways to stop them. When they would first attack trains, what they would do is they would put a landmine underneath the track, and the weight of the train would set it off. It would explode, and then it would take a few days for the engine was destroyed, but then eventually the engineers would come out, they'd fix it, they'd get a new rail car, and they'd go on. And then the Nazis figured out, well, what they'd do is then they would cut down all the trees around the tracks so people couldn't come by, and they would watch them. That's when Sonia talks, she didn't bend down her head. She crossed a railroad track, and she didn't bend down her head because she wanted to fight so hard against these people. She really wanted to show them. Afterwards, the Nazis figured out that if they put in a train with sand and rocks, just an empty car in front of the engine, and as it went across the tracks, when the bomb went off, it exploded. They had spare parts in the back of the train. They had engineers and construction people in the back of the train, and they were allowed then to just fix it. And so the partisans had to have better ideas. And this goes about being supplied and being coordinated. What they ended up getting are these magnetic mines they then could throw on the side of a train. And then those then would explode. So as the Nazis so they went back and forth and back and forth. They also, we talked about food. A lot of the Nazis would get food. They wouldn't bring necessarily food in all the way from Germany. That's really ineffective, right? They would bring food in from the local population. They would work, and there was a lot of locals who really wanted the Nazis to win. So they would give them food. There were also a lot of locals who had no choice but to supply the Nazis, or they would be killed, or their farms would be taken away. So the locals had a very difficult position to be in. And the partisans would try to stop that. One of the ways they found some farmers who were sympathetic to the Nazis and kept on feeding them, kept on giving them food. So on one day in 1943, the partisans in Poland lit a line of fire in the fields for 4 or 5 kilometers. One ribbon of fire going across the entire farmland to show the farmers that they cannot cooperate with the Nazis. There were partisans and missions included destroying telephone lines and lines of communication. A lot of, they had some wireless and some radio, but a lot of it was through telegraph lines. And in some partisan missions, I heard of one through interviews with partisans, that they actually took away miles of train track. They had thousands of people, and this time that was coordinated. Partisans came in and they literally took miles of train tracks away. So it would stop the trains for weeks maybe. I want to show one thing. Can we show another clip from the video? Is that possible? So I'm going to ask you guys this. You guys get to choose. So we have a series of short films, as you see. The longest one is 4 minutes, 40 seconds, so it won't be that bad. And so I can look at one on living and surviving the partisans dealing with food, winter and night, medicine, or shelter. And so I want you to think about which one you guys would rather see by a show of hands, and then we're going to show one of these clips. I should say that when I was inspired to start this organization, the goal was to interview 50 surviving partisans and do extensive interviews, the interviews that have never been done before. We would do about 3.5 hours of interviews with each partisan, not focusing on what happened after the war, but what they were like as kids, what were they like when they were growing up, and what their experiences were in the partisans. So, and from that we completed these films. So let me see, a show of hands for food, a show of hands for winter and night, a show of hands for medicine, a show of hands for shelter. I think it's winter and night. It's close though. Okay, if we could please show that, and then we'll come back. Thank you. So in theory, if you click on it, it will play. In theory, click on it.
It's loading. Let's see.
Okay, I'm going to stall until it does. I'm going to talk a little bit about medicine, because that seems to be pretty interesting too. And we'll hopefully get some tech support and we'll get this other short going. Is that partisan medicine was very interesting because many times they didn't have any supplies. The woman you saw, Sonia Orbuck, who did a lot of work there with the, when she said she did not bend down her head, she wanted to stand up and dream across the tracks, help with medicine. What did that mean? That they had one piece of gauze, and if someone got shot in their arm or the stomach, they would probably use it to kind of hold them together. And then that person probably wouldn't make it, and then they would unwrap it, wash it out, and try it on the next person. There was not sterile environments. There was a story of a man, Norman Salzitz, who's also in one of those videos, and Norman has a story where he's basically shot, and he runs to this guy who is a veterinarian in Poland. And in Poland, there's a lot of anti-Semitism, so you got to be careful who you're talking to. And the vet says, "I really can't help you. This is more than I can really help." There's another doctor somewhere else, but this guy doesn't really like Jews. And if he knows that you're Jewish, he might kill you. He'll turn you in. So Norman sees this guy pretending he's not Jewish, and the doctor says, "I need to give you a shot. Please pull down your pants." Well, as a Jewish man, he was circumcised, and that would really give him away. So he knew that if he did that, he would be given away, and he could be, very difficult position, to put it lightly. And so Norman takes out a grenade and pulls out the pin and says, "I'm going to pull down my pants, you can give me a shot, but basically no funny business, we're both going to get it." I mean, the basic necessities that we think we have here, if it was a non-Jewish partisan, they could get medical help, no problem. The Jewish partisans had to rely on vets and people who were sympathetic, and most of the time, even something like penicillin they did not have. All right. Are we closer? Okay, let me just go to the website then. Can we do that? Try it one more time. Click on Winter and Night and see if we can get to work. Hey, good job.
Outstanding.
Winter's bad weather brought more difficulties to the Partisans.
The snow, you cannot walk in the snow. Sometimes 2-3 feet high snow. And you leave traces when you walk.
So we had to walk in different directions to confuse the enemy, so the enemy will not know where we are situated.
We used to go backwards. Like instead of going this way, we're going this way. We learned to line our tracks. Jewish partisans struggled to keep warm with inadequate clothing. Many only wrapped rags around their feet for shoes.
That was the fiercest winter of 1942. It was very, very cold, and he just went out with what we had on.
I stood guard once in winter with just a shirt made out of silk from a parachute. That's cold.
You're soaking wet. I mean wet. And you never take a shower, you never bathe, you stink. You're unreal. 40 below zero, 30 below zero. It's tough. You cannot hold your gun in your hand because the hand freezes to the gun. Tough.
My legs were burned completely because it was so cold. When we sat in front of the fire, I did not feel that my flesh was burning, my legs. It was horror.
You know, we were sleeping in the forest and freezing rain and snow, on the snow. The snow covered us up. In the morning I got out with a blanket of snow.
Sometimes we used to cuddle up to each other, and just for the warmth of it. In the morning it was, it was cold in our country.
Very often we slept with animals, and they put up a lot of heat.
To survive in these harsh conditions, partisans scavenged among the dead.
I could not have any blanket all this time till we hit some Germans when they were retreating, and 2 of them they were killed. I see a blanket behind him. So grab this blanket, and that was the best present that I ever had.
But the bad weather also had advantages.
But the winter gave us a feeling of safety, because when you looked outside the area in which we were encamped, you could see footprints, you could see if people were walking there. So we really felt safer, even though we were a lot colder.
In worse conditions were, better it was for us.
We only walked at night because it was dangerous to walk during the day, because the Germans were around, the Polish anti-Semites were around.
So the night, blizzard, heavy snow, heavy rain, this was our friends.
The night is protected. Our mother protects your children, the night will protect us. The night is our mother.
I love that line, the night is our mother. I think that's such a wonderful line. What is, do you have any questions after seeing that, anything you want to discuss based on that short? Yes? How much do the groups vary in size? That's a great question. I would say some of the partisan groups in Ukraine going further east were probably in the thousands. Some of the groups were 40 people. They needed to have some kind of baseline group just to be able to protect, and they, just to get the basic necessities such as food and shelter, you needed to have a group of people, because it also gave you strength. And they were very organized. We said as the war went on, the groups became very organized. When it became winter, they went into the winter quarters to say, this actually, I'll show you something. This actually just came up on our website. We actually just put this out yesterday, so you are some of the first people last night to see this. This is our website, which is jewishpartisans.org, and you have here, if I can get this guy to work, sort of. Where should I point this? Okay, let's go here. So this is something, if we look at the food, or rather the shelter, this is something called a zamlanka. And what's interesting about this is that, check it out. So this is a structure, you can look on the ground, that is a chessboard used with potatoes. There's a great book, if anybody is anybody's interested in this subject, and maybe you might assign it next year for the reading. It's called The Defiant by Shalom Yaron. And Shalom basically, in the winter of 1942, and has anybody ever been to Chicago in the winter? It's pretty cold. Basically, this part of Poland was equal to being Chicago in the winter, but the coldest winter in 100 years. It was freezing. And so in the winter of 1942, 43, Shalom and 4 other guys, all in their teens, all probably your age or a little younger, built this, which is a zamlanka. It's a Russian word for dugout. And we basically built this, and you can see different perspectives, different views. So I click here, we can actually see it from the back here. And so we built a very talented modeler, and we built a 3D model of the zamlanka based on Shalom's description in his book, The Defiant. And you can look back here, and you can see, it's hard to see. Can we turn off lights for a sec? Let me see if we can do this. But you can see these are potatoes in the back here. And then there's some onions in the corner. And this is some spare wood here. And a bucket. And a shovel. And they would get supplies. I mean, basically, they would steal the supplies, because sometimes they would go and people would help them, but because of the anti-Semitism was so much, they couldn't come in and say, hey, brother, can you help me out? They'd say no. So this is the view from the bed. So right here where we are now, so obviously this is the front area, the stove where I'm pointing. This is the bed where the 5 of them slept. Then this is the back area. And when they did this, they had to get logs. And they just couldn't cut down all the trees because people would know where they were, right? So they had to cut trees from very, very far away and kind of randomly, and then take this. And then when they did the dirt, because it's half above ground and half underground, the dirt had to be brought far, far away to actually make that work. And I'll show you actually. So here, and they were here from basically November to February, and so we kind of simulated. Can you see it looks like writing on the wall here? Try to zoom in a little. This is actually writing the months of the year, November through February. I think we made this. This took place in the early part of February, and they left in March. So they had to have enough supplies to basically stay there the entire winter. But it's really kind of a neat little thing. What do you guys think of this? Is it we're trying to, but so you'll never, hopefully no one will ever have to build one of these yourselves. But it'll kind of show you what the experience was like and try to make something as accurate as possible. And to look at a picture of what one of these guys look like from the outside, this is kind of, these are taken, a lot of these pictures, it's interesting, a lot of these pictures were taken after the war. Because imagine taking a still camera out in the Partisans. No one had it, right? No one had their own little pocket camera they were taking. Most of the pictures were taken after the war, or the motion picture footage you saw in their short films, those were taken by Soviet news photographers basically making propaganda, or same with Lithuania, and also in Italy. We got a lot of footage from an Italian archive where the Partisans were also big. And there's another picture here of the Partisans. Here's actually a guy, I'll show you this clip. If I can find a way to navigate this guy. See if this works. It's a guy named Sam Lato. His job was to build some
The in Lanka was like this. Okay, like this, you see? And we covered this with board, not with board, but with trees, this type of trees. And what we used to do is we used to chop the trees, make it one side a little flat. You follow me? So it took a while to build the bunker because you have to prepare the trees. And we put it flat on top, and on top of that, we put in branches with leaves. And on top of that, we put in straw. And on top of that, we put in the thing from pine trees. But everything was going down. So if the water came in on top, it was rolling down and couldn't reach the bottom. It was rolling down from the top. So we never had water. If we had water, we put the new branches on top.
Isn't that an interesting clip? So they really had to build it in such a way from an engineering perspective that if it rained, they would not get wet. Shalom's talks about when it started to thaw out, they got a lot of water that was dripping. This is actually an excerpt from the movie we have
Parsons
on
built
Shelter.
underground bunkers called Zimlankas.
Half buried in the ground and half of the above the ground. And there were fires going 24 hours a day inside to keep us warm because we had no clothing, we had no blankets or anything.
When we built the bunkers, you know, it was hard. We had to take the earth out and bring it, get rid of it about some kilometers away. And then to make the top, you know, we had to steal big doors. We had to steal these things to make the floor to cover the bunker. And then also we had to bring in young trees for support. Once the bunker was dug, we had to put in to hold down the ceiling. And the ceiling also was for wood. So this was a terrible work.
In one Sri you could sleep maybe 25 people or so.
So if one turned, everybody had to turn, because it was really one legs on top of the other.
Isn't that a great image? I mean, just being like packed as sardines. And this is something else that just to show if you're interested in the subject, I mentioned The Defiant, which is a wonderful book, and we're very lucky that Larry King, just actually last Monday, recorded this with us. So if you want to go to what looks like an interesting subject, pick a subject. What was it? Bathroom. All right, let's take it.
The bathroom. We found a ditch which we used for a toilet, and we covered our traces with snow or earth. When we couldn't go out, we used a special bucket with a lid until such time when we could empty it out into the ditch. An important chore was emptying the bathroom bucket. It was done frequently so there would be no stink added to the other discomforts we had to live with.
So you saw there's a few buckets you saw in there. So this is actually, Larry was nice enough to actually been very involved in our work, and he actually read clips from Shalom's book, The Defiant. So I both recommend reading his book if you're interested in it, but also if you're just interested in the Sri Lanka and living and surviving, Larry reads clips from that. Something else I'll also point you to the website, that is, we can even do this here, Ask a Partisan. So let's say you have a question and you're dying to know. These people here, Frank, I think there's Leon, there's actually, well, you can see there's a little problem here, right? Same picture. We're fixing that. Bernard, Sonia, or Myrna. And you can actually get different quotes from them, and they'll talk about their lives. Bernard, he was a partisan in France. Guess how old he was in this picture? Yeah, 15. It's amazing. That was actually a good answer. And so here on this, this is the area where he was active as a partisan. And we have more of this here. And you could read a little short, it's about a 300-word bio about him. That's what he looks like today. There's a few women who work with me in the office thinks that he's really good looking and wanted to, in the picture. But so this is actually here. So we have clips here. So which clip do you want to see from?
Never spoke German again.
Never spoke German again. All right. Here we go.
I dislike the Germans. As I mentioned many times, I spoke German fluently. I had learned it in school and so on, and I knew it fluently. After the end of the war, I have refused to talk it, to speak it, and I have kept my word. I have not spoken German since then. I know it's hateful, I know what the Germans did for Israel, but I can't forget the famous word, I can't forgive, but I can't forget.
So these are little shorts we have. So, and it's actually interesting. You can actually go online and you can look at questions that people have. I gotta figure this out. Have asked. One question was asked. I did a lecture to some high school students, and someone asked, and they couldn't ask it in class. What do the girls do about their period? Really good question. You're not going to ask in class if you're 14 years old. Maybe it's easier college age. Maybe it's not. But so questions like you're going to do. So should we ask a partisan question? I should say there's not a partisan standing online. They're not. If someone wants to ask a question, we can ask a question and we can submit it back as a class. What do you think? Should we? So basically, who is going to be the victim? Who wants to put it in here? You need a volunteer. Whose name? We're going to send it back to someone. Anybody? Volunteers, raise hands.
Anybody have a good question?
Anybody have a good question first? Do you want to ask any partisan?
What did they do about the period?
Well, do you want to look at the answers first? The actual answer is that they did not have them. People were very malnourished, and unless you're going to get some decent nourishment, it's really not going to happen. But would anybody else like to ask a question or not?
What about babies? Do they have babies?
That's a great question. Do you want to ask that to them, or you want to ask it to me? Yes or no? Did anybody get pregnant? Here we go. Did anyone? Well, that's a really good question.
At the end.
Oh. Wait.
It's really hard to control them.
Wait, P, I can't totally space now.
N-A-N-T.
N-A-N-T. Thank you. Actually, I'm a father of a 9-month-old, and I think I should know that by now, huh? It's hard doing this public speaking thing. Okay, so who wants to answer it? Who wants to get it sent the answer?
Okay, Myrna. M-Y-R-N-A. There isn't anything I wouldn't do for my students.
Well, we can't get an N.
Well, M-Y-R.
M-Y-R-A.
M-Y-R-A. A.
Oh, there it is. Goodman.
Okay. We'll keep it personal, A. Which email?
Goodman at sonoma.edu.
Goodman at
Sonoma.edu.
S-O-N-O-M.
God. It's harder than it looks to sit up here, you guys. Trust me. S-O-N-O. Okay.
Outstanding.
Okay, so that's it. And so we've said we've already answered this, and so we know this has not been answered before.
What is the please select?
The please select is basically lets us just know, are you your teacher? And so here we go, submit. Ah, it's important to see this wire. After all that, hopefully it's regarding the site. Here we go. Let's see if it works. Anyway, it should have taken us long to do the demo. Well, I appreciate your patience. But we can, but anyway, there's some really wonderful things here. That there's the short films that we just saw online. You can see. And you can look at all the films that we saw on DVD on the website as well, and you can also download study guides and other information. So let's turn back on the lights. Lauren, lights, please. Thank you. Awesome. Does anybody have any questions besides spelling? Thank you.
How did they organize? Like, were there leaders, elected leaders, to organize the people? Because, I mean, like, how did they get everybody to do what they were going to do and say who was going to do what?
That's a really good question. Were the leaders, were they organized? How were they chosen? A lot of it really had to do with people would have natural leadership characteristics, and when the larger Russian Soviet partisan groups, they were generals, they were commanders who were already in place, and they kept, when they were in the regular Russian army, they were the lead, and then when they became partisans, they also took the lead. Later, when you had the let's say all Jewish units, certain people would just rise to the top. When there was infighting, they were very treated like a military unit. So if someone fell asleep on guard duty, they literally could be shot for that because everybody's life is in danger. If people wanted to take a couple days leave and go into a village, sometimes someone might have a romantic relationship with someone in a village, and they stole an extra day, they could also be punished. So they were run like military units very, very, very strictly. Any other questions? Yes?
Did they ever kill any of their own, like, people like that?
In terms of what?
In terms of within the partisan group?
Yeah, if someone did not obey something, an order, they could be killed for
Did that
that.
ever happen?
Yeah, absolutely, it happened. Because people just, it's so hard for us to put ourselves in that where if someone is responsible, if someone's responsible in this room for all of our safety and they fell asleep on it, everybody's life literally could be in jeopardy. So they were very, very harsh rules. Similarly, if they captured someone, if they captured a Nazi or a collaborator, they really did not have time for a trial. These people would be interrogated, and many times they would be killed because there was not that kind of infrastructure to take care of them, and it's also wartime. Any other questions? Yeah.
There are a fair number of women who are represented, and they grew up in a different time. Do any of them reflect this going outside the boundary of the traditional roles of women at the time? Do they talk about that?
Well, it's very interesting. Women in partisans is actually very fascinating. It's a very interesting subject to me. Just to elaborate a little on that first, we're actually developing a study guide, a printed study guide of 3,000 words about women in the partisans, and so that'll be out in a couple months, and if you're more interested, you can go to the website and you can download it. Firstly, women were about 10% of the partisan population. They had a much, much, much more difficult time than men. Unfortunately, men being basically physically stronger, some women were taken advantage of. When Sonia is actually a great, when Sonia comes in to the group for the first time, it's actually really interesting. She'll say it better than I will, hopefully. When Sonia comes in, and the commander basically says, you have to find a man.
I was called in to actually.
She's 16 years old.
Commander's wife. And she talked to me. I was a youngster, sheltered, did not go out, didn't have any boyfriends or anything of the sort. And she started talking to me. She said to me, "You're a young girl. There are very few women in the partisans. And I would advise you to select an officer, life will go better for you. And this is my advice, and you listen to my advice. I opened my eyes wide. I didn't know what she was talking about. And I couldn't understand what she wanted of me. And we just let it go. That's it.
Now, Sonia was very lucky in that she, excuse me, her uncle was a tracker in the army. And Sonia and her mom and dad, her uncle, were living together outside in the woods for about a year. Freezing to death, literally in a hole in the ground, did not shower for 1 year. People would sometimes bring, sympathetic heart would bring like potatoes, and they would just eat the raw potatoes for nourishment. And they found there was a partisan group nearby. And so they went in and they said, well, the uncle was a tracker. So Sonia talks when they met them for the first time. It's actually handy. This actually, she'll say that.
So we just didn't know where to go. We were lost again.
And
then this peasant, the Hon, came to us and he said, look, there are rumors, there are partisans, Russian partisans in the vicinity. And, but I don't know whether they're friendly to Jews. They might kill you, but I might talk to them, perhaps they'll accept you. And we said, well, we have nothing to lose. Waited a long time, actually. And then came out a commander for political affairs. And he started interviewing us. He looked at us. Skeletons were sitting there for skeletons. Dirty, long hair, overgrown. And he started asking questions. He says, so where are your weapons? We didn't have any weapons. So how many trains did you dynamite? We didn't. So I thought he was not going to take us in, but being that my uncle was a trained scout, they needed a scout and to lead them in the vicinity where the partisans were. There were strangers in that part of the country, so they took us in because of my uncle.
So because of her uncle, they were allowed to join the group. And her uncle, unfortunately, was killed in an action about 3 or 4 weeks after they were in. But they still let them join the group. Sonia, we mentioned, did medical. She would help as a medical assistant. She wasn't trained. She just would help wrap people together, feed them, and soothe them. She went on missions, and that was her job. She was lucky because she was with her parents. And her parents in some way could offer some kind of protection for her. Myrna, who's someone else we also have here, Myrna has, let's go here, Myrna has a great story. I don't know if we have a clip from Myrna. We'll see, but Myrna, that's her with a goat. That's just a cute picture of her sheep. She ended up meeting her husband, who was the partisan commander in an all-Jewish group. Now when she escaped the ghetto to join the partisan group, she heard they were partisans there. And what did she do is she and her sister were basically, late teens, and they were both good looking, and they went to the partisan group, and they said, sure, ladies, you can join the group. And she ended up falling for her husband. That kind of went happily ever after, but they were lucky. And they went in and she said, my parents are now left the ghetto and they're going to be in a work camp and they're going to be killed. And so because of the relationship they had with the partisans, they let them in. And they were allowed the parents were allowed to come in. Unfortunately, her parents never made it and were killed later in the war. But that was another example. So, but in some ways, women because of the military nature of it, women sometimes had to be concerned about rape sometimes. If someone was caught raping a woman, they would be killed because it was a military unit and it was run that way. If someone went into town and a man may have raped a woman, in town, Jewish, non-Jewish partisan doing that, they would be killed because they had to be friends with the town. Women in many cases did the cooking because the infrastructure is just as important as the fighting. You need people to make the food. You need people to take care of the sick. And many times the women did that, not all the times. And it was a very, very hard job. One thing which I find is interesting is that in traditional society, today we would say a guy has prospects. What does that mean? Right? He's an accountant, he's an attorney. And some people today, still 2005, these men in society are very well, are interested in these people. A lot of women might be attracted to them. Well, in the Partisans, a lawyer, an accountant, really isn't that helpful in the woods unless they have other skills. The guy to work with his hands. The same guy that the woman would ignore in the village, all of a sudden this guy is really the meal ticket all of a sudden. And so relationships changed. And it's very, very, very interesting. You would have relationships like Myrna. She fell in love with her husband, and they lived happily ever after, I think until 1977 when he died during heart surgery operation. And it's just very heartbreaking to hear what she has to say. But many relationships, so the women in some ways had power over men because they then could choose who they were going to be with. And some after the war, they broke up, never to see each other again. And then sometimes they stayed together and they spent the rest of their life together. This is Myrna talking about, this is talking about her husband.
Yes, I remember we stayed at one place. And we had one partisan who was supposedly watching. We were all asleep.
So this is a good point.
The peasant's house. And one partisan was outside watching. If the Germans don't approach us, it's actually not the Germans, but the local police. The Germans were afraid to get into the forest because you were feeling that each tree is shooting at you. But the Polish police, so they attacked the house and then we counterattacked them, and they ran away. But the partisan who was guiding, the house, they killed the leaders, the partisans, because how could he knew that everybody was asleep, and he supposedly was watching us, and he got into the house. And he also was like that, going to sleep a little.
I know it doesn't answer that directly, but it talks about, the idea of, and it's really hard to be in that mind. Why would you kill someone in a group if you need everybody? But if the person, people could have been killed with that. I think the site just went up live last night, so apologize if I think these two are switched.
But not everybody could do it. Some of the partisans, I remember that when the war was over,
Myrna meets her husband.
We had a lot in common, and we talked, and I liked him a lot, and we decided that we'll be together in the forest. First of all, for a woman, it was very hard to live without a husband who would support her, who would help her. And so, a lot of times, women would get together with men, and they had nothing in common. So they would be together during the war, but after the war, they separated. I was lucky enough that I loved my husband, and he loved me. And it was like a love affair in the forest. Can you ask for a better place? So we were lucky that we got together, and we promised each other that we'll be together forever.
It's a great story. There's another, we don't have her clip up yet, a woman named Gertrude Boyarsky, and I said if you're interested in this, she has a wonderful, in the study guide section, let's see if this works, Gertrude Boyarsky, so you can click on one of these, and in theory, is download a PDF file. We'll see if this works. And Gertrude has a great story. She was about 17, 18 years old, and she was with a Russian group. And when you're in a Russian group, you celebrate Russian holidays, right? It makes sense. And so the Russians have a national Women's Day. In America we have Secretary's Day. In Russia, a little more progressive, they have National Women's Day. I'm not saying that all secretaries are women, I just want to be clear, but just to say just a communist country and how they look at things differently. And what is interesting about Gertie's story is that it's National Women's Day, and what are they going to do? So she and her girlfriend, like 17, 18 years old, say, why don't we burn down that Nazi bridge down in that village? And they say, okay, and the commander says, all right, I need proof if you do this. So they say, fine. So they two girlfriends go out, and they get some kerosene, and they get some straw from the local village who doesn't want us to help them, so they have to do it by gunpoint, because the village doesn't want to be responsible, they don't want to be known as collaborators with the partisans. And they burn down the bridge, and the Nazis are across shooting at them, and they're returning fire until the bridge is burned down. They take a burnt piece of the bridge, they bring it back to the commander, and they said, here, this is our gift for National Women's Day. And she was given a Medal of Lenin at the end of the war because of that action. So there's a lot of diversity. I think it's very important. Not one story, as of the approximately, my theory is over 30,000 Jewish partisans. Not 50, but over 30,000. And there are 30,000 individual stories. So what I'm just talking here today are some snapshots. We can make some generalizations like women in the partisans, but each one has its own unique story. A person in Eastern Europe, a Jew in Eastern Europe in a partisan group, had so much anti-Semitism towards them. They couldn't find a doctor. The local population was trying to kill them. They could not get food. But someone like Walter Marx in Italy had a completely different experience because they were not as anti-Semitic. And they could get food, and they could actually, and just the areas were different. And so that's very important that everybody had a different experience. But Gertie has a great story, and later, in the coming weeks, we're going to put some of her video online. And I recommend, if you're interested in it, to check it out. Does anybody have any other questions? Well, since it's such a nice day, should we wrap up? I'm going to hand over the reins. Anyway, thank you so much for having me. So there's two things I'm going to leave you with. If you want them, you don't have to take them, I won't be insulted. First, we have a little postcard, talks about the website and 6 short films. But this is the real item here. We have these very cool Resist stickers. This is Etta Rubel, and this is someone who is a woman partisan you actually saw in the video clips. And it's a little, it says, Etta Rubel fought against the Nazis as a Jewish partisan in Poland. For more information, go to www.jewishpartisans.org. So I'm going to leave these back here if anybody would like to take them. And thank you.
Thank you, Mitch.